The next gentleman that I'm going to introduce is a gentleman that has been a friend of mine for more years than I think he or I one will admit to. But when I first got to know Bob Gallagher, Bob was the city manager here in Hobbs. Following a city manager, why he went on to Expert Enterprises, to Energy Management Group, and then in 1998, Bob was appointed by President Clinton to serve as principal advisor for the oil and gas to the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Mr. Bill Richardson. Prior to joining DOE, Bob came with considerable knowledge and background in energy issues. Bob later went to, in January 2000, he was selected as president of New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, NMECEP. As president, he is the chief executive officer of the association, which is made up of a total of 325 member companies, and many of these companies are represented here today. And to all of you, thank you for being with us. Bob was named by the New Mexico Journal as one of the top 100 power brokers in New Mexico in 2006 and 2007. In 2003, Governor Richardson appointed him to a 6-year term on the Board of Regents, New Mexico State University, and he was selected president of that board March 2004 and re-elected March 2005. He is the president and on the board of directors of Educate New Mexico. He's on the board of directors of Rio Rancho Economic Development Corporation. And I've got to tell you that his two greatest assets are his beautiful wife, Jennifer, who he married here in Hobbs, as well as a very bright son, Robbie, that's in school at Rio Rancho. But Bob, thank you for being with us today, and we'll look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate those kind comments. I also appreciate the fact that since he found out my parents were here, he had to change the introduction, and I am very thankful for that. I really enjoy coming back to Hobbs. Obviously, I spent 20 years of my life here in Hobbs, and it's always a pleasure to come back and to visit. And it's a pleasure to be here, and thank New Mexico Tech for the sponsorship of this very important conference, and I think it's one that's going to grow in importance throughout the years to come. But I have to tell you, let me ask first, is there any press in the room? Okay. Hi, guys. I have to tell you that although I lived in Hobbs 20 years, I was raised in Brooklyn, and I'm not used to beating around the bush. And so there will be some comments today that are critical and extremely critical, I think, of Congress, and they need to be. And so I want to maybe engage you in a thought process that's a little bit different from maybe what you heard this morning or maybe what you're thinking. Because as I look at this, the making of an energy policy, where are we going? Right now we're going straight to hell. That's exactly where we're going with trying to put an energy policy together. That made my mom cringe when I used a 4-letter word in front of a whole bunch of people. But that was my upbringing. Let's talk a minute about the factors that are affecting the market. Because when you start talking about an energy policy, you have to talk about what's impacting the market and where we're going. Because economists like to say that it all boils down to supply and demand. You hear that every place you go. How come the price of crude oil is up, price of gasoline? Supply and demand. But there's really many factors affecting the tried and true laws of economics. And those factors have contributed to today's high demand, tight supply world energy market. For starters, demand is very strong, coming from mature economies like the United States and Europe, plus the developing economies of the countries like China and India. And I tell you, in April and early May of this year, I spent 2 weeks in China hosted by PetroChina and New Mexico Tech. And if we don't understand China, we're in trouble. There are 40 cities in China that have more than 10 million people. There are 100 other cities that have more than 1 million people. If we're going to put an energy policy together that's going to work, we're going to have to engage countries like China. Granted, they're communist, enough said. But they also, we buy their goods and they lend us money. Sounds like a one-way deal to me. We need to engage the Chinese government in conversations, or any energy policy that we have is going to fail. It's guaranteed to fail. And per capita income rises in those developing countries. The demand for energy is absolutely expected to continue to grow. Tight supplies have been aggravated by political instability, resource management, and weather. The Iraq insurgency, civil unrest in Nigeria, and political uncertainty in Venezuela are among those examples. And hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico have affected operations in both the United States and Mexico. Finally, the decline in the value of the United States dollar against other countries has put American consumers at a disadvantage. American consumers must now pay more for crude oil than countries with stronger currencies. Now, when you talk about an energy policy, I think you have to talk about 4 groups of people who should be involved just in the United States. And then, as I said, you have to engage countries. Even unfriendly countries in unstable regions of the world have to be engaged. But I think there's 4 groups that we have to talk about this morning, or this afternoon. That's obviously the industry. Second is the consumers. Third is Congress, and I would put the government in with Congress, both at the local level, the state level, the federal level, and Congress. And then my favorite group of people that you have to talk about are emotional obstructionists. And we'll talk about them in a little while, because I don't want you to confuse emotional obstructionists with environmentalists, because they're different. And when I get to that, I'm going to give you the life cycle of an emotional obstructionist. So if one walks in the door, you'll be able to absolutely recognize them in a heartbeat. All right, first of all, the oil and gas industry has done a terrible job of educating the public about our industry. And we are to blame for that. Our country knows very little about oil and gas other than what they've watched on TV. Remember Jed Clampett and the Beverly Hillbillies? Shot the gun in the ground, out came oil. He's a bazillionaire living in California. What happened to the EPA and the OCD and the air quality and the right-of-way and the dry holes and the rancher who said, hell no, you can't get on the land? I said that because Gene Sanderson is here. Okay, what happened to all that? And then all of a sudden Dallas comes along, right? And we all wear gold Rolexes and we drive Mercedes-Benz and we eat dinner on the 34th floor of a bank building. That's what America knows. When I was with Secretary Richardson in Washington, D.C., I walked into an office of a very powerful United States Senator who still serves today, who was a chairman of a very powerful committee. And when I walked in, he said, young man, sit down. I know you're here to educate me about oil and gas, but I know about oil and gas, and I'm going to tell you. I know that oil has those big pump jacks and natural gas has those little pump jacks. I know why the price of diesel is going up, because you guys stopped drilling diesel wells 5 years ago. Okay? Now that would be funny, except that's a very powerful individual that's making policy that we are living with today. And that should be a concern to everybody. The industry itself, when we talk about knowledge, let me just make a comment and an analogy. Many of you all know my father was with the FBI for close to 25 years. Now, I say that from the early 60s to the mid-80s. So we have 4 children, and we're a good Irish Catholic family, and you come home at Christmas time, and sometimes during those 25 years, we prayed to J. Edgar Hoover instead of God Almighty, because that's what the FBI did when you were a J. Edgar Hoover agent. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think J. Edgar Hoover could run the FBI today like he ran the FBI in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? The answer is obviously no. People's sensitivities have changed, people's priorities have changed, people's thought processes have changed. Then why the hell do we think that we can run the oil and gas industry the same way we did in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? We can't run the oil and gas industry anymore like we're a 5,000-pound gorilla. We can't do it. We have to communicate, and we have to work with users of private and other public lands. And if we don't have communication, we will have legislation and litigation. And they will legislate us right out of business. And if you don't believe me, you haven't been around New Mexico for the past 4 or 5 years to see the significant and very costly changes that have occurred to the oil and gas industry in New Mexico under this administration. Now, full disclosure, Governor Richardson's my buddy. Okay, 27 years we've been friends. Worked for him in Washington, D.C. His policies about oil and gas need to be broader. His thought process about oil and gas need to be broader. And we need to understand that Mexico has the 2nd largest reserves of natural gas in the United States and the 4th largest known reserves of crude oil. New Mexico is a player. New Mexico is a player in the industry throughout the United States, and New Mexico needs to be a player as we put energy legislation together and an energy policy, if a policy is going to work. So I think we have to understand that as an industry we have failed, and that if we continue to want to just walk on people's land and say we can be here because the law says we can be here, they're legislators out of business. We need to change our thought process. Now, let's move to the consumer. We talked about the consumer just a little while ago. What do they know about oil and gas, and what don't they know about oil and gas? But the consumers, we as a country are greedy. We as a country are spoiled. We as a country have more registered vehicles than we have licensed drivers. More registered vehicles in the United States than we have licensed drivers. And last year, when everybody was hooting and hollering about the price of gasoline, I'm taking the bus, I'm going to ride my bike, I'm going to walk to work, we're going to carpool, okay? Well, then why did the demand for gasoline go up 1% in the United States? Because we're spoiled. Because we're going to drive big SUVs, because we're going to drive to the dry cleaners and back, and then later we're going to drive to the grocery store and back, and then we're going to drive here and back, and we don't think that we have to do it any different. And if you think the electric car is going to solve the problem, I want to see you crawl into one of those things and can only go 40 miles before you need to plug it in to someplace. And that brings us to then the components. Before we get to Congress and my buddies, the emotional obstructionists, let's talk about an energy policy, okay? What should an energy policy be? Well, everybody says we have to have an energy policy that's going to secure the future of energy for the United States. Plain and simple, okay? So I'm not that smart, right? I'm not a MBA. I'm not a geologist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a geoscientist. I lived in Hobbs 20 years, so that makes me pretty smart. But it's pretty simple to me that we ought to use a structure that's already in play. How do you secure your financial future? You secure it with a financial portfolio. And that portfolio may include gold, cash, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, whatever whatever helps secure your energy future, you have a financial portfolio. So why don't we do that with energy? Why don't we drop the words conventional and unconventional? Sorry, Tony. Why don't we drop those words? Why don't we drop the words renewable and non-renewable? And why don't we talk about energy and what's going to secure our future? And what's going to secure our future is an energy portfolio. What goes in the energy portfolio? Okay? Any form of energy that can pass a very quick litmus test. Are you available? Are you affordable? And are you reliable? That's it. Okay? Nothing else. Are you available? Are you affordable? And are you reliable? And what is that? What answers those three questions today? Oil, natural gas, coal, wind, solar. Okay? What doesn't do that is to convert every school bus in the city of Albuquerque to run on natural gas and have one filling station that pumps natural gas. That doesn't pass the short three-question litmus test. Neither does ethanol. Ethanol is the ugly stepsister of MTBE. Remember, MTBE was going to save the world 15 years ago because it was going to be in the gasoline and we're not going to have any problem with the air. And now what is MTBE? Banned, and the government's paying hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits because of contaminated water, because they rushed to conclusions that MTBE is good. Why are we in this ethanol position we are in today? 2 words: Iowa caucus. Iowa caucus. How can you tell me that ethanol is the savior of the world when it costs more to produce and costs more to use? You know, and then you wonder why I said at the start, the energy policy's going to hell. Ethanol is going to save the world. And we have on foreign ethanol that made by sugar, we have a 54-cent per gallon tariff on that. And we give $1.50 tax credit to ethanol in our country, and it still can't do it. You take every acre of farmland in the United States, every acre, not just corn, every acre of farmland in the United States, turn it into growing corn for the production of ethanol, and you have now accomplished approximately 20% of all the gasoline that we're going to need in this country. 20% of every acre of farmland. Why did we rush to this conclusion and a false hope of our country with ethanol? Right? We've got to be smarter. It has to be available, it has to be affordable, and it has to be reliable. Now, does that mean you oil and gas guys are against renewables? That's why you want to drop the word? No, we're not against renewables. If you check and do your homework, the oil and gas industry is the largest spenders for research and development of renewable energy than anybody else in the world. Okay? We've got to have renewable energy, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, in 1971, we all learned a new word. What was that word? Embargo, right? Because the Middle East decided they weren't going to send us any oil. So gas shot up to $1.57. It's kind of funny to think about it now. $1.57, and what did everybody say? Never going to happen again. We're going to remember. We were 30% dependent on foreign oil in 1971. And as we stand here today in 2008, we are 60% dependent on foreign oil, and it's going up. That's why we don't have a seat at the table when they make energy policy. Well, and someone said, well, you really do. And I said, okay, all right. I have 30-something first cousins. We used to always go over to grandma's for let's say, Easter, right? We did have a table. It was called the kids' table. Sit there, be quiet, and don't say anything, and eat your food. That's where the United States table is when we go and talk to other countries. Because we have so little energy, and we have so much demand, that we're at the mercy of other countries. Every morning we wake up, the United States oil and gas industry writes a $1 billion check. Majority of that goes to foreign governments that are unfriendly to us. In fact, hundreds of billions of dollars is going to President Chavez in Venezuela. The same, I'll be nice, the same guy who came into the United States and called our president the devil and we're paying him hundreds of billion dollars a year for oil. What kind of policy is that? You know, it gets worse. We're at war. The last time I checked, we were at war with Iraq. We buy oil from Iraq. I don't know if you bomb them on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you buy oil on Tuesday and Thursday. I'm not sure what the policy is, okay? But our policy stinks. We need to educate people, okay? Congress will tell you that the refineries, we hadn't built a new refinery since 1976. Thanks to our emotional obstructionists, we haven't. Other people will tell you, nah, you boys haven't built one because you don't want low price. You want high prices, okay? What they have forgot to tell you is because we have expanded existing facilities, in the last 5 years, we have grown 20% more refined product than we had before. Because we can do it on an existing facility and not on having to build new ones. But let me ask you this. Just think if Hobbs had never built, wasn't allowed to build any other grocery store since 1976, or had not been able to build any other schools. Do you think the schools and the grocery stores would be old and crumbling and not reliable and not safe? Then why don't people understand that about refineries? Why don't they understand when there's a major disruption in the supply chain, the price of oil, the price of gas at the pump is going up? That's pretty simple, I think. Now, Congress. Let's talk about Congress. They have failed the citizens of the United States, period. In all due respect to the gentleman we're going to honor tonight and the gentleman that you heard on this video earlier. Thank God they were there. Thank God they were there, or it would be worse than it is today. Congress has failed the citizens of this country by not adopting an energy policy that is based on sound science and common sense. They have failed us just at every level. Let me give you an example of levels in New Mexico. You ever heard of the lesser prairie chicken? The lesser prairie chicken down by Carlsbad and Roswell. Okay? It's not an endangered species. It's not on the endangered species list. But yet, from March 15th to June 15th of every year, on 500,000 acres of prime development land, we are prohibited from any new drilling activity. You know why? That's the mating season of the lesser prairie chicken. And I guess the noise from our activity gives them a headache, and I guess they get out of the mood, and then there's no lesser prairie chickens anymore. Okay? That'd be funny. That'd be funny, but it's true. But it's true. Look off the coast of Florida. This is the worst example I can possibly think about. East of the coast of Florida, 100 miles, is lease area 151. Okay? Potentially some of the largest new developments of oil and natural gas in North America in over 50 years. We're not allowed there. The official reason by the government, it would upset the aesthetic beauty of the coastline of Florida. Now, we're not talking about 1 mile, or we're not talking about 2 miles. We're talking about 100 miles. We're talking about from here to Lubbock, Texas. From here to Lubbock, Texas, one drilling rig way out there 100 miles, and we can't do it because it upsets the aesthetic beauty. Well, let me tell you something. What the federal government needs to do is go down to the farthest tip south of Miami Beach and turn south and look and tell me what you find 90 miles away. The most vile communist country that we have let be there for the past 50 years. Did that upset the aesthetic beauty of the coastline of Florida? I guess not. And now it's even worse. China has joined forces with Cuba and is now drilling as we speak today. Your phone's ringing, sir. Okay. All right. And as we speak today, 50 miles off the coast of Florida, China and Cuba are drilling for oil because it's in international waters and because we can't tell them it upsets the aesthetic beauty of the coastline of Florida because we don't have jurisdiction there. But we're not allowed to drill 100 miles off. There's a disconnect there. There is a disconnect, and Congress has failed the American public. Now, fourth, Let's do fourth, emotional obstructionists, okay? I don't want to hear that these groups are environmentalists. They are not environmentalists. Environmentalists are sitting right here in this room. Environmentalists understand that we need to protect the vital water, the vital ground, and the vital air in our country. We understand that, and true environmentalists understand that. But these obstructional groups, obstructional emotionists, are not environmentalists. They have one job to do, and that is to shut down oil and gas development, okay? They are normally paid by nonprofit agencies that have really classy names. So you think that that's where the money comes from. The New Mexico Wilderness Society will tell you that they have 10,000 members, okay? You can join the New Mexico Wilderness Society for $1. I think you're a chartered member for $5, okay? Where do they get their funding from? What about the San Juan Citizens Alliance? You think that they're all made up of San Juan citizens? I did a little checking on the San Juan Citizens Alliance, and in the last 5 years, they've received over $500,000 from 4 foundations in the states of Connecticut, New York, and Pennsylvania. We've got wide-eyed liberals on the East Coast telling us how to live out here in the West, and we're taking it. We're taking it. The oil and gas industry is getting our backside kicked by these emotional obstructionists. They're better represented, they're better staffed, they're better funded, and we better understand that they're here to shut us down. Okay? So let me give you a quick life cycle of emotional obstructionists. When they're born and they're about, well, from the age of birth to 13, they're called NIMBYs. Right? Everybody knows what that means. That's not in my backyard. Okay? Yeah, we need new refineries, just don't build it in my backyard. Okay? Then when they get to be about 25 or 30, they become bananas. And that's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. Okay? Okay? That's exactly why California went dark in the year 2000. They didn't build an electrical generation plant for those last 10 years. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And then when they get to be supposedly a full mature adult, they become caves. And that's citizens against virtually everything. And you've seen them out there. I mean, if there's a protest, let's go protest. Okay? And then when they finally get to retire and enjoy the fruits of their labor, sitting around their house, drinking tofu juice and driving a Yogo, when they get that opportunity, a Yugo, I guess, I'm sorry. When they get that opportunity, they become a NOPE, N-O-P-E. And that means not on planet Earth, and that's exactly where they want us to develop the oil and gas that they use every day is not on planet Earth, okay? It would be funny, but it's hundreds of millions of dollars out of your pocket. It's hundreds of millions of dollars out of everybody's pocket. It's bad, and it's real, and we better start understanding it. Now, last month, every lease that the BLM was about to offer, every lease was challenged. And it was challenged on the new flavor of the month. And that is that the BLM did not study the oil and gas impact on global warming. Okay? That's the new flavor of the month. Last month it was something else. Last month it was something else. There's a problem with our laws in the United States. There's a problem that you get to just protest and you don't have to back it up with anything. You don't have to back it up with a thing, and the government has to do very long, extensive studies that delay and deny access to the minerals that we absolutely have the right for. So we need, as a country, to do a better job of insisting on sound science and common sense to drive this energy policy. Because any policy that I have ever seen, any public policy that I have ever seen that was based on politics and emotions makes bad public policy. And any public policy that I've seen that is based on science and common sense has made good public policy. So we need to understand the difference between those two. As an industry, our industry needs to understand that people's sensitivities and priorities have changed, and we better change with it, and we better start communicating, and if not, we're going to be litigating and legislating, and we're going to be in trouble. So let me just close with some choices that I think are needed to ensure the future energy security of our country. What is needed today are policy choices to increase, not decrease energy production. Barriers to oil and natural gas production only contribute to a volatile energy prices slower economic growth, and lost American jobs. An economic study undertaken by the API last year found that nearly 5 million jobs could have been lost by the year 2030 had harmful energy proposals in Congress been enacted. 5 million jobs in the next 22 years had energy proposals in Congress been enacted. That's why on a daily basis we ought to say God bless Pete Domenici and God bless Jeff Bingaman. And if we don't say that, we're in trouble. That doesn't mean I don't want to God bless Heather Wilson and Steve Pierce and Tom Udall, but they're in an election and I don't want to get into that. Okay? Fortunately, most of these proposals did not survive, but they remain very real threats this year in Congress, particularly punitive taxes. Particularly punitive taxes, and I look for that legislation to be heard sometime in the next month or two, and we're going to go back to the same debates of the years of Jimmy Carter when those same policies failed. And that's the Congress answer to an energy policy. You know why Congress doesn't have time to do an energy policy? They're too busy investigating whether Roger Clemens used steroids or whether the camera that assistant coach did on the New England Patriots, if that was illegal or not. The hell does that have to do with Congress? Why don't they make an energy policy that we can live by? We should learn from the past and take some positive steps to ensure that we meet America's energy needs in the decades ahead. As a society, we cannot remain passive to energy, nor to the environment, nor to economic growth. Each will fall short of its fullest promise, absent constructive industry and government relations and partnerships committed to providing our nation with a worldwide energy security policy. What we need is a public policy framework to ensure future energy security for our nation. We need elected and appointed officials who understand the energy challenges we face. We need a greater commitment to increased energy efficiency. We need to diversify our energy resources, drawing upon the full range of energy sources, including alternatives. We need to have an energy portfolio. We also need to increase and diversify our oil and natural gas supplies, both within this country and abroad. And we need to enhance energy technologies remaining on the cutting edge of advanced technology. We need to get it right on energy. Too much is at stake for our nation to do anything otherwise. And I'll close with one more shot at Congress. Did you see all of them taking their photo opportunities last week, beating up on the chairman of Chevron, ConocoPhillips, BP, Shell, and one other? Did you see them there? Someone ought to ask them why they didn't have the chairman of the companies that produce 85% of the oil and gas that the United States uses today. Why didn't they have them up there? Why didn't they have the Devons and the Chesapeakes and the Marathons and the Energins? Why didn't they have the Yates up there, the Marbobs up there? You know, because we've never heard of them. But we've heard of Chevron and Exxon and BP. We've heard of them because we see their signs on the gas stations. Well, America needs to be educated. There's 150,000 retail gas stations in the United States. Less than 10% of them are owned by oil companies. Okay? Congress needs to be educated. 85% of the oil and gas the United States uses today comes from non-integrated companies that reside here in the United States. We've got to get it right this time, because if we don't, our future is not secure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to visit today.
Bob, thank you very much. I had a short conversation with Mr. and Miss Gallagher there, and I've asked them if they could to try to help you speak plainly in the future. You sugarcoat too much. So I've got to say that I served the first 8 years I was in the State Senate and Senate Conservation Committee, and that was a tremendous education, as the obstructionists were there every meeting. They had a perfect attendance, and I promise you that they was trying to stop anything that was moving forward on oil and gas and nuclear energy in New Mexico. Thank God there's people that do have some common sense that we occasionally prevail, but I do know who those obstructionists are, and I saw them every day in committee for 8 years. We'll take about a 10-minute break at this point and then back to the main auditorium, if you will, please.